guys, and welcome back to another episode of In the Barn. I'm Robin.
And I'm Kelsey, and in today's episode, I'm going to share the wild and crazy story of the Juice Man and the doping scandal that has forever changed horse racing in the United States. Okay, so this is going to be kind of a long episode, so we should just jump right to it. But yeah, we're going to be sharing a crazy story about horse racing, drug dealers, doping, smuggling, all kinds of crazy stuff. So, we ready?
It's going to be the horrible side of horse racing and the side we all dread, hate, and know exists.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, this is the reason why so many people hate horse racing, because I had a coworker ask me the other day, why isn't horse racing an Olympic sport? And my only response was because it's gambling. It's not a sport. It's gambling. And with gambling and that type of activity, when there's money on the line, crazy things happen. And people do crazy, horrible things for a little bit more money.
All right. We'll do our own episode on the Olympics and our reactions to it. But already, without sports having money necessarily betting on them or against them, there's already some pretty atrocious behavior. So putting racing into the Olympics would just make their behavior that much worse. And there's so many shady people in the world. There's just, so many bad people. They should never be able to come within 10 feet of horses, and yet they do, and they own them.
I mean, the FEI has to keep changing rules in order to keep the sheik from cheating. So...
That's the funniest thing. I don't know why, but that's so funny that you're just that batshit crazy.
Yeah, that batshit crazy that they have to keep changing rules in order to keep one person from cheating. So it's definitely happening in all sports, but I think horse racing, with just the amount of money that's on the line and how easy the money is, right? The money is available to everyone at every level versus eventing or dressage or show jumping. The money's not available to everyone, right? It's only available to those who make it to the top of the sport. Is there going to be a big payday? Where that's just not the case with horse racing.
Exactly. And racing is able to get so many more viewers that aren't involved in horses themselves, that they're able to get those bigger jackpots and stuff, because racing is it's easier to understand than dressage or eventing. It's which horse crossed the finish line first, and that people can get behind and cheer for.
Right. And the public can bet on horse racing. You don't have public showing up to cross country day to wager bets. That's not part of our process. So
not really.
No, not really. And so all of that plays a huge factor on how people go about trying to win and trying to beat the system.
Sad the horses that get roped into it.
And the number of horses, that's also the really sad part.
I know.
Part of this investigation that we're going to talk about was started because thoroughbred breeding has been cut in half in the last couple years. So they were having less, foals being produced. The chairman of the jockey club obviously sees that as a bad thing. He sees that their thoroughbred is losing out, that they're reducing the numbers, and that's not a good sign for the breed. And in my mind, don't we have so much excess racehorses that are just getting dumped constantly left and right and feedlots and being shipped out of the United States? Isn't reducing the number that's being bred a good thing, and having more quality horses? Shouldn't that be the goal, is to have better quality horses who have a longer life and aren't dumped at 3 years old to a feedlot?
Well, that's the thing, is longevity of life.
Yeah.
Right? We all know racehorses have a really short shelf life that is just abysmal. Ideally, obviously there's plenty of good trainers out there that are involved in it and do take the time and care with the horses, but there's also just as many bad racehorse trainers out there that don't give a crap about the horses before them, and they just run them into the ground.
Yeah. So with that, want to talk about some of those bad trainers?
I suppose so.
So for this story, I have a couple articles that I relied heavily on, but of course all the articles and all the sources I used will be linked in the podcast notes, so you can check that out after. But I just want to shout out some of the articles I used right at the beginning, and then I'll shout out a few more as I'm telling the story. So the first article I relied heavily on is from the Washington Post. It's titled "The Rise and Fall of Jorge Navarro, the Alleged Doping King of Horse Racing," and this was written by Robert Klemko. There's another Washington Post article titled "With Private Eyes and Political Muscle, Horse Racing's Elite Push to Punish Dopers," and that was written by Gus Garcia Roberts. And then the third article was in Bloomberg Business Week titled "The Juice Man and the Drug Scandal That Rocked Horse Racing." So those are the articles I used the most for this story, but I, of course, found a lot of other sources. So again, check out our show notes with the links to all those sources if you want to know more. And with that, let's get into the story. I'm going to start the story off by, first off, I'm going to have to introduce a lot of people for this story, and I'm really sorry. It's going to be a lot of names. I'm going to do my best to not confuse you, but I do recognize it's a lot of people in this story. So maybe take notes as you're riding or driving. You might want to take some notes. So to start this story, I'm going to introduce you to Scott Robinson. So Scott Robinson was an Ohio native. He ended up growing up on a small farm in the Ohio countryside with his family. They owned and raised horses when he was a kid. By the time he had turned 46, he had managed to turn his love of horses into a successful business. So in about 2011, 2012, Robinson had launched several online animal supplement companies specializing in selling supplements for animals in the racing industries. So his websites advertised products for horses, dogs, camels, pigeons, and alpacas. At this point in his life, he had made a small fortune, was able to drive a fancy Lamborghini. He lived, I believe, in Florida. And at this point, he was out for revenge. He had a business partner that he felt had wronged him, and he needed help getting sort of the money he believed he was owed back. I found several sources that said it was a business partner. Others said it was an ex-trainer that he had worked with because he was a racehorse owner for a while. I'm not sure exactly who this person was he was mad at. But he started asking around, trying to figure out how could he find this person? How could he track down his money? How could he get his revenge? And he was suggested by the security chief at New Jersey's Meadowlands racetrack. He suggested that he contact an agency called 5 Stone Intelligence. So Bryce Cote was the man who suggested that. He used to be a minor league relief pitcher and a police detective. He had worked with 5 Stone in the past. And so with his recommendation, Robinson contacted 5 Stone. And 5 Stone agreed to help him. That was one of their firm's specialties. They're a private investigation firm that looks into large corporations and foreign governments to sort of track the money through these different companies to figure out what illegal activities they're up to. They advised Robinson that this investigation would run him about $30,000 is how much it cost to start this investigation. He was apparently happy with this offer. He agreed to work with them, and soon, due to their government connections, they were able to connect him with FBI agents, and he was meeting with FBI agents in hotel rooms throughout Florida and the East Coast. However, about his third meeting in September 2019 with the FBI agents, Robinson started to become suspicious that the agents weren't investigating his partner and that they were in fact maybe investigating him. And this might be because at his third meeting, they ended up interviewing him for several hours, the FBI agents. Then they walked him down the hotel room to another room where there were DEA agents waiting to talk to him. They talked to him. Then they took him to a SUV that was waiting, put him in the back seat of an SUV, drove him to the warehouse where Robinson kept all of his supplements that he sold online. Once all the agents were there at the warehouse, they began searching it. They took all his computers. They took everything they could from all the documents, all the records that they could from the warehouse. And this was the moment where Robinson was like, hang on. I don't think they're investigating my partner anymore. I kind of get the feeling they're investigating me. Which turned out to be true because on March 9th, 2020, a few months later, he was arrested and indicted with 26 other people for a huge horse racing doping scandal, and he was part of that. So what Robinson hadn't known at the time he called 5 Stone Intelligence was that they were the same agency that had exposed Lance Armstrong for using performance-enhancing drugs to win the Tour de France. They had sort of tracked all of his dealings and where he was getting drugs and how he was getting them. They also discovered that there was a lot of doping among Russian athletes in the Olympics. They were closely intertwined with several government agencies, including the DEA and FBI, and they were several years into another huge doping investigation when Robinson called them. At the time he placed his call, 5 Stone had already spent the last few years working with Department of Justice, USDA, FBI, the New York Police Department, and top Jockey Club officials, all investigating doping in the racehorse industry. And the thing was, they had known who Robertson was when he called. In fact, the man who suggested he called Five Stone was actually an informant for Five Stone at the time, and he was part of that racehorse doping investigation. But why was Robertson already on the radar? Why did they already know who he was? That was because Robertson's supplement business was just a front. He was actually, instead of selling vitamins and hoof growth supplements and other actual horse supplements, he was selling illegal performance-enhancing drugs to trainers and vets and horse owners across the country. And his websites were not shy about what they were selling. They were definitely selling illegal and mislabeled drugs that were not only injuring horses, but killing them as well. In an interview, Robertson laughed at the idea that he was a major player in a doping conspiracy. It was for marketing, honestly, Robertson said, of the names he gave his substances. Blast Off Red sounds a whole of a hell lot better than B12 and some other B vitamins. He claimed he never sold anything that could hurt a horse, but acknowledged the feds wouldn't agree. They think that everything is dangerous to a horse. But if that's all it was, then 29 people wouldn't have been arrested and charged. And in the last few weeks, a lot of those people who had originally pleaded not guilty have been changing their pleas to guilty. A couple weeks, I think Navarro, as well as Service, some of the people we're going to talk about, have been actually changing their pleas at July 2021. So that gives you an indication that it was the government, the prosecutors definitely have a pretty good case against them if they're willing to start to change their pleas. And they're like afraid of the prison time that could come with that. Also, if it was just for bad marketing or, the marketing of it all, then the Washington Post, the New Yorker, Bloomberg Business Week wouldn't have been writing articles about this scandal. Like, it wouldn't have made it to mainstream media if it was really as simple as Robertson called it.
Right. So note to self, if you're involved in a lucrative drug ring and doping ring, maybe don't reach out to Five Stone. Does not sound like they're your best friend to take care of shady business.
Right. You may want to do a little bit of investigating on the investigators first, just to make sure you're going with a firm that's actually going to help you. Because the Five Stone, they are run by a former DEA agent. The person that started it is a former DEA agent. They have a ton of FBI agents that work for them. A lot of people go after they're done with a government career, they switch and start working at Five Stone Intelligence. Five Stone Intelligence is the stuff that I think spy movies are written about. They sound pretty cool. But they are closely intertwined with the government.
Right. I love that he went to them to get his old business partner, and they were like, we're gonna flip the tables on you, buddy, and we're gonna take you down instead. Sweet justice.
There is a quote where he said in one of the articles that he basically paid for his own indictment. He paid to be arrested, which is true, but also I feel like you deserved it. So I'm not that sad about it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And I can't tell, because there wasn't a lot of information about who his business partner was, if it's the same business partner he was indicted with. So in the Robertson indictment, there is another Scott that is listed, and I have a sneaky suspicion it's that Scott, who is a former business partner that he organized the websites with, and is also a failed racehorse trainer. And so it kind of sounds like it might be that other Scott, but I'm not positive. But I feel I think it was, and so they were both arrested. So there's at least that.
So we got some shady Scots, what I'm hearing.
Yeah, stay away from Scots is definitely for sure a thing. I would avoid Scots for sure. Let's rewind a ways, because I want to tell you about the man who is behind this big scandal, who is sort of seen as the operator, the man in charge, the juice man himself, if you will. That is Jorge Navarro. So I ended up finding a blog post from 2012 that was posted on a blog called Racing in the Sunshine. It is a blog that does behind the scenes interviews with racehorse trainers and owners at the Tampa Bay racetrack. Let's just say this blog from 2012 definitely did not age well when we look back at Navarro's life. There's some shady stuff that also happened in this blog that I got some tea to spill on it for sure. But in this blog, this is one of the few places I was able to find any information about him growing up, because a lot of the stories and articles I'm finding now are obviously about the crimes, and it's hard to find those articles that were being written about him while he was winning and people wanted to know more about him. So Navarro was born and raised in Panama City, Panama, before moving with his family to Detroit in 1988 when he was 13 years old. Both his stepfather and step-grandfather were racehorse trainers, and he ended up traveling a lot with his stepfather, Julian Julian Canet. He worked as a groom and a hot walker for his stepdad while his dad was at tracks. However, his father was considered a second-tier trainer, training horses at lower-end racetracks, including Collier Racecourse in Miami Gardens, Florida, as well as like racetracks in Detroit and all along the East Coast. The first record I could find of his stepfather, Julian, as a winning trainer was 1982, and it looked like he stopped training in 2015. His career earnings for a 33-year-long career were listed at $9.8 million, and it wasn't until 1991 where his yearly earnings were over $100,000. This doesn't seem too bad until you realize his stepson, Navarro, had career earnings of $34 million over a 12-year period.
Whew. That's a lot.
And then I'm going to say career earnings or earnings a lot. And those earnings are the horse's earnings. Those aren't specifically the horse trainer's take home, because depending on how that contract is worked out, the owner gets a chunk, the jockey gets a chunk, and the trainer gets a chunk. So the way they don't post how much that trainer took home himself. They just post like what his horses earned him. So Navarro ended up working for quite a few years as an assistant trainer. He also worked as a veterinarian assistant for 3 years. And then he started breaking young horses in Ocala before he felt like he was comfortable to go out on his own and become a racehorse trainer. He's on his second marriage to wife Jennifer, and he has 2 daughters and a son with Jennifer. And then he's got a boy and a girl from a previous marriage. So the earliest record I could find, which is on the website Equibase, Equibase is a really handy website if you want to look up records for horses, trainers, owners, barns, anything you want to look up specifically is that Equibase website. So when I'm referring to a lot of these numbers, that's where I'm getting them from. So Equibase has a record of him being a winning trainer in 2008, which makes sense because he didn't get his trainer's license until 2007. That year, 2008, he won just over $7,000, which is okay. He had 2 horses that ran that year that he was the trainer for. One of them, he was actually listed as the owner, which is La Tarzana. That was his first horse that ever won. She was a 2-year-old mare at the time, and she has career earnings of $1,600. He is still listed as her owner, and I don't know why, if this is a paperwork error, if she got sold to a little girl and now she has a wonderful life as like a show jumper mare or something. I don't know. She doesn't have any foals listed, so I don't think she was bred. He isn't a breeder, but it is odd that he's still listed as the owner, as like long-term ownership is not part of his like deal. It's not what he does. He does claims races and then goes to resell the horse. So the fact that he claimed her and then didn't resell her in a race or some way is kind of odd to me, and maybe is an indication that stuff was happening day one. The other horses that he ran in that time period are listed under different owners, but it is of course still hard to find what happened to those horses from the mid-2000s. In 2009, he had managed to grow his stable from 3 starts in 2008 to 73 starts, and he won over $100,000 his second year. He had a win percentage of 14%, which is mediocre for sure, but it's not a bad year for your second year. By 2010, he had moved to the South, back to Florida, and he had started training horses there where he had 143 starts, and he was listed with $300,000 in winnings with a 17% win average. In 2011, he won 23 races at Tampa Bay Downs to finish 5th in the standings. And in 2012, Navarro was awarded the title of the winningest trainer in Monmouth Park, New Jersey. And this was only 4 years into his career. So you can see that in 4 years, he has definitely had quite the rise, quite a good start to his career.
Yeah, impressively so.
Impressively so, which was suspicious. So if you look at his track record and you look at his earnings, he does better every single year. Throughout the life of his career, he didn't stop racing until he was arrested in 2020. And so every single year he does better and better, which if you look at any other trainer, that just doesn't happen. They're going to have a couple years on the up and up, and then there's going to be a drop off and then up and up again. It's not you don't just exponentially improve every single year. That's just not normal.
Well, that's not how horses work. That's not how horses function.
Nope, not how they work. You're not always gonna have a ton of winners. So when I talk about win average, that is something important to keep in mind. So it's said that the best trainers have usually about a 20% win average. So for him to be in his 3rd year with a win average of 17% is high, but as he continues throughout his years, that win percentage gets over 30%, which is just not normal. And his dad's win percentage, or his stepdad's, when I looked at his records, he had a 49% win average. So half of the time his horses were getting first place. That's also, I think, really suspicious. Like, I have no information that his stepdad was up to anything shady, but to have half of your horses get first place every time, that's it. I mean, I guess if you're that good, and for someone who raced at second tier tracks and wasn't good enough to be...
Name one other person that has their horses winning half the time. Bet you can't.
Well, I also don't really know any racehorse traders, so the only one I do know is Bob Baffert, who's also super, super shady and up to no good, but is not part of this case at all, even though we are well aware that he drugs his horses as well.
Wait, is that the one that was found sitting on the dead horse? Or
No, that's an Irish guy. No, Bob Baffert, his horse won the Kentucky Derby this year, but then was eliminated due to the drug tests.
Yeah,
that's his horse. So other people were saying that it was really strange for him to be doing this well, as he was never at the barn. He never watched the horses do their exercise rides. He delegated all of this work to his assistant trainers. But Navarro claimed that much of his success was due to his early experience as a groom and a hot walker as a young boy, and of course his employees. So a quote in the blog that I found, this is from Navarro: "I've got to listen to them. In most cases, they spend more time with the horses than I do. One of the realities of running a racing stable is that you deal with a lot of paperwork and talking with owners and planning the training schedules. When anybody asks me why we're doing so well, I say to them, it's my workers. They know they make more money when we win, and that keeps them going too." So he's admitting that he doesn't spend a ton of time at the barn and that he does delegate because he's busy doing paperwork. But it's definitely, when you look at his career, it's sort of suspicious. The other suspicious part to his career that people have pointed out is that a lot of the horses that he was winning with were already older, had already failed in their careers, were either injured, or he was buying at low claims, like they were horses that weren't predicted to be very good, that he was able to buy in claims races, and he would turn them around and make them winners in no time. In that blog post, he mentioned that it was because of the Tampa Bay track, that the horses just loved that track and they would have problems at other tracks, but they would come to him, become part of his program, and miraculously they would do wonderful. And he said it was because of the track.
BS.
Probably BS, but maybe, I don't know, maybe horses just want to retire somewhere nice. They like the Florida weather. I don't know. Maybe Tampa is the place for horses to do well. So many people at this time were beginning to suspect there was something going on, not just with Navarro, but with many of the trainers that were racehorse trainers along the East Coast, that in 2012, the chairman of the Jockey Club, which is an organization that tracks the registration of thoroughbreds in order to keep the lines pure. People aren't super happy that the Jockey Club is involved with this investigation because they believe their role is just to register thoroughbreds and track pedigree, and that they shouldn't be involved with regulating whether there's doping or not. I don't know if that's a fair argument because who else is going to care? I mean, part of the concern is that they have a lot of money invested in horse racing and that they're losing out on money as these lower end horses do better. So those men that are drugging their horses in order to win are like messing with Jockey Club members with their horses, and they're not getting the profits that they would normally. So that's one of the arguments that I did see mentioned, like, against this investigation. So the Jockey Club ended up partnering with the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. They asked Travis Tygart to come and give a speech at one of their functions that basically, tried to say that we need you to stop doping. Your horses, we're watching you. This is illegal. It has impact, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, that speech really didn't resonate with anyone who was already doping their horses. They really didn't care that the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, which had no regulation, like no authority over racehorses, was trying to tell them to stop doping. And in my opinion, when I look at the stats, Navarro's 2013 year, the year after that speech, that is when things become truly suspicious to me, because in 2013, he had 325 starts and had won over $2 million that year with that win average of 35%. And like I said, normal trainers, good trainers are closer to 20%. And it turns out that 2013 just happened to be the year he got caught for doping his horses. In October 2013, Navarro was cited for several race day drug infractions, which dated back to January 2012. Those infractions were due to overages, where the horse was found to have over the allowed limit of a drug in their system. They had 200 times the allowed limit of fluoxetine in their system. Fluoxetine is the drug name for Banamine. Most horse owners know what Banamine is. They know that it is a painkiller, a fever reducer, something to give your horse that's when they're colicking to make them feel better. So to have levels this high of banamine in their system, it meant that they were drugged right before the race, and that they were likely drugged through injections instead of the oral version of the paste. So Navarro was notified on February 16th, 2012 of these overages, but it wasn't until October 2013 that he was actually fined and was given a 60-day suspension from the Florida track. So with that 60-day suspension from a Florida track, he could just go to a different track. That had no effect on him because these regulations are just played out track by track. There's no federal regulations. There's very few state regulations. And of course, getting fined and caught really did not stop Navarro or make him concerned at all that what he was doing, he should stop. In fact, it probably did the exact opposite and turned him to find sources for better drugs that weren't as easily detected in blood and urine tests. In order to find better drugs, you have to have a better drug manufacturer. So let's talk about veterinarian Seth Fishman. Fishman was a vet in Florida, and he was operating out of Hypoluxo, Florida, wherever that is. It's somewhere in Florida. At that time, he was the co-owner of a vet clinic called Equestology. This was a vet clinic that specialized in rehabbing injured performance horses. He co-owned that vet clinic with a woman named Lisa Gianelli. They, again, specialized in rehabbing. They had aqua pools. They did a lot of work to bring horses, both performance-wise and harness horses, back to competing shape. And while I'm not going to talk about harness racing horses in this story, harness racing horses are definitely part of the story and are victims just the same way as thoroughbreds. So the Questology website is interesting. It's now gone, but it does look like it was up between about 2011 to 2019. I did put that website into the Wayback Machine just to see what it looked like. And the domain name was registered in 2011 is when it first appears, but 2013 is when the website first appears to be active, which those are some important dates to keep in mind. However, when you go to the website for the vet clinic, it is just a restricted access page. You have to have a login just to get to the webpage. And it's not the back door, it's their homepage. I'm not entering an employees only or owners only webpage. It is their webpage. 2011, 2013, websites for your businesses were a huge deal then. So I think it's really interesting that
websites for your business are still highly important. If someone's looking you up and they can't even view your website without having login information, it's one thing to have a login if you are trying to get your client detail or a vet report or something of that nature that's private information, but just to see the basics of the business itself and view their website, what they offer, their various qualifications and stuff, that you have to be able to log in with it.
And I only point that out because this business I know they were operating as a vet clinic as far back as 2003 because I did find articles about it. So what I was saying is maybe in 2003 you weren't using a website, but by 2011 you definitely are going to have a website for your business. So for your only website to be restricted access, and there's no way even to create a password, you have to already have a login account. So someone has to give you permission to get to this website, which makes you wonder what was available on that website. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's just shady. That's just weird. That's just weird behavior. That's weird.
Super weird. At this point, I want to take a quick detour to tell you about another court case that I swear is related in a roundabout way, but also just what the fuck? It's super interesting. So this is a court case from 2010. I found a New York Times article that is titled, "At Military Contractor's Trial, a $100,000 buckle." So my interest is piqued, of course, but what is this buckle? So Fishman was involved in a case against a man named David H. Brooks. David H. Brooks was the former chief executive and chairman of a body armor company that was contracted by the U.S. government to make body armor for U.S. soldiers that were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he ended up using about $6 million of the company's funds to pay for his and his family's ridiculous lifestyle. This included university textbooks for his daughter, pornographic videos for his son, plastic surgery for his wife, a burial plot for his mother, prostitutes for his employees, and for him, a $100,000 American flag belt buckle encrusted with rubies, sapphires, and diamonds.
I don't even know how you take that seriously.
All I want to say is $6 million is not enough for university textbooks. I don't know where she was going, some podunk little school or something, but $6 million is it for university
All
textbooks?
she got was university textbooks? The son got pornographic movies and other people got hookers and stuff, and all she got was university textbooks? I mean, hell, he got an expensive buckle, the wife got plastic surgery, and yet the daughter still only got textbooks.
I'm gonna throw it out there. If she wants textbooks, she probably also doesn't want porn. I'm gonna or a prostitute.
Least give her the option.
Maybe he did. Maybe he was like, choose. What of these things do you want? And she was like, textbooks, Dad. College is expensive. I would like the textbooks. Also, do you think he paid for the tuition or just the textbooks?
I like to imagine it was just the textbooks. He was like, you're on your own for tuition.
Okay. So his lawyers pointed to a board resolution that stipulated that Mr. Brooks was entitled to 10% of the company's profits. Prosecutors said the document, though, was a forgery that he made to justify his personal expenses. And this was confirmed by Ms. Schiegel, who was testifying against him in that trial. So why are we talking about him? Why did we stop this doping case to talk about Mr. Brooks? That's because Seth Fishman ended up having to be a witness and testifying against Brooks at the trial. Fishman knew Mr. Brooks because, like all eccentric rich people, he of course owned racehorses. And Fishman had been his vet. So Fishman ended up having to testify against Brooks because apparently Brooks had become obsessed with the idea of a mind-erasing pill. And he had been pestering his vet, his horse veterinarian, to provide him with a mind-erasing pills. Because he knew about this trial coming up, he had been begging Fishman for this pill for years. He wanted this pill so he could wipe the memory of a chief government witness that was going to testify against him, which was Miss Schiegel. Like, he wanted to wipe the memory of witnesses with a pill. And he thought his vet knew how to do that.
Do you think it's knowledge that, like, just any vet has? Like, do you think my vet has this pill, too? Should I start bugging my vet for it?
I mean, I said, like, do they give mind-erase pills to horses? Like, why would a vet need this?
I don't know. Yeah, what was his connection? Why did he just think that, like...
So that's a good question, and that's why I tell this story. Because it definitely makes you wonder, did Brooks know something about his vet back at this time? Because this was before 2010. This was before Fishman began manufacturing illegal performance-enhancing drugs for humans and horses. Or was this where Fishman got the idea, right? I think there's something about this case that if this man came to you for illegal drugs... What were you doing that made him think you were the guy?
Yeah, that's true. Because I wouldn't just go outright ask my vet, hey, bud, you got a mind-erasing pill? Also, can I get my horse's teeth floated? You know?
Also, right, like, I need this pill because I'm going to erase the memory of a government witness. Like, there's a government person who's going to testify against me. I'd like to erase their memory. And let's float.
Yeah, there's some other shady conversations happening in between to get from point A to point mystery pill.
Right, exactly. And as we'll find out, right, as part of the Navarro indictment, it says Fishman and his partner Gregory Skeleton began manufacturing illegal performance-enhancing drugs since at least 2014. I think it might have been a little bit sooner because they bought the domain name for their website in 2011. And we know that Fishman was Robinson's supplier. So Scott Robinson, from the beginning of the story, was selling these illegal drugs on his website. And he launched his website in 2011, 2012. I'm thinking Fishman was starting at least something. Maybe he wasn't illegally manufacturing, but he was a racehorse vet to a guy who was asking for illegal drugs. It makes you think, was he already doing something for this man's racehorses that he later turned into a manufacturing
There's no
career?
way you would have that many shady connections back then that would, like, end up panning out now years later, and you weren't already having those kind of dalliances back then.
So speaking of Scott Robinson and his websites, so he had several websites that he was selling these products on. One of them was horseprerace.com, which is still a website you can go to today. They do look like they've cleaned their act up and are selling legal drugs, legal supplements and things, but I don't know, who knows. But if you put the website in the Wayback Machine, you definitely get a very different picture of what was going on in like 2012, 2013, 14. So horseprerace.com is listed as your shopping source for vitamins and supplements for racehorses, dogs, greyhounds, camels, alpacas, and racing pigeons. And I would just like to get everyone's mind around the idea of racing pigeons that are also being doped up. I would like you to know that racing pigeons were buying dope to like performance enhancing drugs for the racing pigeons.
They were supplying quite the range of animals there, like from horses to dogs to pigeons and camels. Like, I never once in my life would I have assumed one company would be providing supplements to them all, and yet like only those ones, right? I feel like if you're selling supplements and stuff to horses and pigeons, then you got to have like lizards and like guinea pigs in there too somewhere, but no.
Right. I feel like you could give your racing pigeon and your chickens the same supplements, right? Aren't those like similar? But I guess chickens don't need to be as fast as pigeons. But like racing pigeons is like they have to fly a long distance. So like what kind of like, they're not muscle building racing pigeons, because like what is it, just endurance drug so that pigeon can just fly forever? Like what are you giving pigeons? Like what drug are you making for pigeons? I did not like spend a lot of time looking for pigeon specific drugs. I actually wanted to look at the drug that Robertson mentioned earlier, which was the Blast Off Red injection. So the website says Blast Off is all-in-one pre-race developed to increase endurance, provide immediate source of energy, transport oxygen to muscles, and stop lactic acid buildup to maximize muscle strength. If you're trying to gain maximum performance from your animal, then this is the product for you. You give 10 milliliters 4 to 6 hours before the event, IM only. It comes in a bottle of a 10 milliliter dose. You give that dose to horses, dogs, greyhounds, and camels. Again, I think there's an issue with dogs, camels, and horses all getting the same dose. I feel like there's some size differences, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, you're going to give a dog a heart attack if you're giving them the same dose of a horse.
Right? Right? I think so. At the bottom of the webpage, it says, will not test or swab in any jurisdiction. So if this is truly just poorly labeled B12 vitamins, why did you add that to the bottom of the page? So to say that this is just marketing and that it wasn't actually drugs, and like, obviously the government, the US government, the FBI is not going to charge you if they don't have proof that it was actual drugs. They, of course, had undercover agents buying products from him. They, of course, tested them and found them to not be B12. So for him to say that, that's just ridiculous. Like, obviously the government's not going to waste money for some, like, scuzzy marketing. They're not going to take you to court and, sentence you for marketing. Like, that's not, no.
Right, because that's every supplement company out there.
Exactly. So much of what happened in the early years of the doping programs is really unknown at this point. That's because a lot of these defendants haven't gone to trial yet or haven't been sentenced yet. So we don't really know all the answers to a lot of the questions we have. For example, I don't understand how Navarro and Fishman truly got connected. I don't know who approached who first. I don't know how, we'll talk about another trainer, Jason Service, how exactly everyone got brought into this same circle. Those are questions that we're not going to find out for a while until these cases move all the way through the court system. And of course, since they were arrested March 2020, there's been like a huge delay, right? Something happened March 2020. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but I remember something big happened. I think it affected the entire world.
Something like a global pandemic rhymes with coronavirus.
Something to that effect. Yeah, no, I think it doesn't ring a bell, but like I think you're onto something. So in 2014, while investigating the USA cycling team, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, that's the one that's ran by Travis Tygart, received a tip that a lab in South Florida was providing performance-enhancing drugs to cyclists. The drug in particular that they were providing was Epigen, which helps with endurance. That lab was run by a man named Seth Fishman. However, that tip didn't really go anywhere. They weren't able to investigate it further, and it didn't end up coming back up until a year later when Tygart, who had that tip, handed it over to Five Stone Intelligence. In 2015, the Jockey Club chairman, Stuart Janney III, went to Travis Tygart to ask him if the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency could investigate the horse racing. He said, no, we can't. There's not enough of a case for the government to try it, but what you should do is contact Five Stone Intelligence. We've worked with them a lot with like taking down other dopers, and they can put together the legal framework that we can then take. Like they need to get us enough evidence that we can then take it back to the U.S. government and try it. So that's why like a lot of the stuff that happened in 2015, between 2015 and 2018, we don't really know the details of because that wasn't a government investigation. A lot of the indictments and court documents that I'm looking at were between 2018 and 2020. 2020 are the events. And those are documented because they were part of an FBI investigation. So the FBI is for sure this happened here. And then we have evidence of this other stuff happening earlier. So as I mentioned, right, Five Stone Intelligence was well known for taking down Lance Armstrong. They also investigated a lot of Russian athletes, and many of the company's employees had been spies for the U.S. government, for different agencies, and they were used to conducting surveillance on terrorists and drug cartels and taking down supply chains. And that's how they wanted to start with this investigation. They wanted to start at the bottom to figure out where these trainers and owners were getting these drugs from, and so they turned to the dark web to try to determine this. When they were on the dark web, that's when that lab in South Florida kept popping up. They kept seeing Fishman and his lab popping up as a source for a lot of these drugs that were being passed along the eastern seaboard into Kentucky, Ohio, and even the United Arab Emirates. So one of the pieces of information that Five Stone was given was that they were to not go after any small fish. Janney, the chairman of the Jockey Club, wanted to take down those who were profiting the most and rigging the system the most. Five Stone ended up getting a bunch of informants to work at different tracks throughout New York and New Jersey. One of those informants was Bryce Cote. He was conducting surveillance on trainers, and he had like a whole bunch of track informants that were helping him keep an eye on people he thought were suspicious.
Was this the guy that was working as like an informant for Five Stone that turned in Scott Robinson originally?
This is the guy that Robinson went to and said, hey, I need help trying to find get my business partner and get the money. And Bryce was like, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you should contact Five Stone. And Bryce at that time absolutely knew who Robinson was, knew what Robinson was up to, and was like, well, I might as well. Like, that's what he was doing, was directing people, directing Five Stone at people. And so it just made it a lot easier for Five Stone when Robinson approached them, because Robinson was willing to talk and share a lot of information without them needing warrants to get that information. So at this time, they were banning a lot of people from the tracks that they could, but that was the only recourse that any track owner had, was to ban people that they were suspicious of.
Is there not a course of action that if you get banned from 3 or more tracks, that now you have a ban from racing for a year or something? Because I feel like it should work along the same lines as a yellow card, at least at the very minimum, right? You get a certain number of yellow cards in 12 months, you have a 3-month hiatus.
I mean, I think there are some tracks that definitely work like that, where, okay, if you've got a bad reputation at these tracks, you're also we don't want you at our track. But these tracks are all independently run. The states are all independent of each other. So there's no, you could do illegal stuff at one state, but you can just go over to the next state and there's no recourse. There's no communication. There's no laws that prevent you from doing that. It's all horse racing is its own thing. So at that year, 2015, Navarro had career earnings of $3.8 million that year. And he was, again, the most winningest trainer at Monmouth track. So this was his second year, even, with a horse named XY Jet. XY Jet, his career started with Navarro at the very end of 2014. He ran his first race at the Pasco Stakes in Tampa Bay on December 27th. In that race, he placed second. So he had a year's earnings of $70,000 that year, with that second place finish with Navarro. XY Jet was born in 2012, and in 2013, as a yearling, he was sold at the Ocala breeder's sale for $56,000 as a yearling. He was a big gray thoroughbred, and in his career, he earned $3 million with 26 starts. So, and his career didn't end until he was 8 years old. So that's pretty, 26 starts as an 8-year-old and $3 million. I mean, that's a long career for a racehorse.
Yeah, it's decent. It's longer than most.
In 2016, Navarro had smashed a season record for wins at that track that had stood since 1975. He also had 3 horses saddled for the Breeders' Cup, which is one of the top races in horse racing. And that year it was held at the Santa Anita racetrack in California, which you guys are probably a little bit familiar with. They've been in the news a little bit. Just a little bit.
If you're not familiar with them, they're the ones notorious for always having horses die at the racetrack. It is a horrendous place.
So they're famous for the publicity they're getting. But the track Monmouth that Navarro spent a lot of time at, they have on average 20 horses die a year. Suspiciously, or interestingly enough, once Navarro stopped training at Monmouth, the deaths dropped.
Oh, coincidence? I think not.
Yeah, I know. I think it might not have just been his horses, but horses in general, part of doping program. But they have about 20 horses die a year at their track. So Santa Anita just getting a ton of publicity for it. But his rise obviously was quite quick, and people were starting to call him the Juice Man at this point, because of how quickly he had become successful. He finished 2016 with $4.1 million in earnings, and he was the 29th ranked trainer nationally. But 2017, the investigation was well underway, and Five Stone was preparing to hand their findings over to the FBI. That same year, Navarro was fined, actually. This time he was fined for a video that of him in a bar where he was being referred to as the Juice Man by an owner of a horse that had just won. The Juice Man, like I said, had become Navarro's nickname, though he stated publicly it wasn't fair for anyone to call him that, and he claimed it was just a nickname jealous owners and trainers called him. The New Jersey Racing Commission ended up fining Navarro $5,000 because they determined that conduct was detrimental to racing. He and the owner he was with explained that they knew they were being filmed and they were just being sarcastic, trying to troll a rival owner who had called them cheaters. Navarro said, "Everyone wants to pick on Navarro when I win a race." That was his quote. Everyone just wants to pick on me for winning. Interestingly enough, Navarro's barn at Monmouth sat next to that of another trainer who was doing really well at that time. His name was Jason Service. You might know him as the 2019. His horse won the Kentucky Derby in 2019, but was eliminated due to interference. Not drugging, interference. And it was said that Jason Service had an odd way of training. His horses never worked. Like, they never went for exercise runs. They never worked out, but yet they would show up at races and just blow the competition away. And no one understood how he was doing that. How could his horses not be exercising yet show up at a race and just dominate? It got so bad at Monmouth track that when Navarro and Service were training there, that trainers who normally took their horses started going to other tracks. They started going to other, Delaware, New York, and Pennsylvania. And so the fields got smaller and smaller. There was less people that were willing to compete against Navarro and Service. And bettors started staying away because they were getting smaller returns on their bets because the competition was less and less. A lot of Service's success, Jason Service, came from the CEO of the company that owns Monmouth. The CEO had him training a lot of their horses, and he began to build a good reputation as an exercise rider and then as a trainer. In 2012 is the year where he got into the top 100 trainers in the nation, and he was number 73rd in 2012, which I think is a suspicious year because we know that Fishman was manufacturing. We know that Robertson was starting to sell. So for 2012 to be the year that Service breaks into the top 100, I think is weird.
Yeah, a lot of things happening at the same time. Too many to be coincidences.
This is the point in the show where I'm going to ask you to pull over if you're driving, sit down if you're standing, and if you're riding your horse, it's time to bring them to a walk. Because things are going to get a little rough from here on out. Because so far, I've just told you what the public was seeing from the outside, how these people looked so successful. Now it's time to sort of dive on into the inside and find out what was actually going on. And it's not that pretty. So most of the stories I have to share are between 2018 and 2020, because that is when the FBI was doing their investigation. The FBI had wiretaps. They had undercover agents that were meeting and buying products. They had undercover agents that were having discussions with people that were part of this group of co-conspirators. Again, there's 29 people that were arrested, so there's a lot of people that were involved and teams of people doing different things. What everyone was ended up being charged with, or the most common charge, was that they were selling or using or administrating adulterated or misbranded performance-enhancing drugs. Because horse racing isn't regulated nationally, these things aren't regulated that just giving a performance-enhancing drug is illegal, like it is with sports, right? You have a U.S. doping agency that oversees that. With horses, it's more about, is the drug you say you're giving your horse? That's where the government can kind of step in with some of these, and that they were hiding and concealing this, that they were hiding horses, they were hiding products, they were doing tons of stuff in order to not be caught. And so all of that is illegal, but actually giving the horse the drug is not illegal. So what were they giving the horses? So like I said, Fishman and his partners, Erica Garcia and Gregory Skeleton, they were veterinarians who were manufacturing these drugs, and they were manufacturing them obviously in a lab that wasn't a regulated lab. So that meant processes of how they were making these drugs wasn't regulated or overseen by anyone. And the ingredients they were using could be from anywhere. We find out that some of these drugs were being smuggled in from Mexico, right? There's a lot of things that were happening. These vets also were handing out fake prescriptions in order to ship drugs and to cover up any drugs that might appear in blood tests. So the drugs that they were giving, a lot of times these drugs are going to be referred to as customized drugs. What that means is that there isn't a like store brand you can buy. So like Banamine. Banamine is not a customized drug. I can purchase it as Banamine and give it to my horse. A lot of these drugs are being specifically manufactured to be performance enhancing drugs. While they may have drugs in them that you could get from your veterinarian to treat real issues, they're not drugs that like you and I could buy without finding a dealer. So one of the most common drugs was SGF 1000. This contains a growth factor and is supposed to promote tissue repair and increase the horse's stamina beyond its natural ability. It is not a known drug, but it is something that is like specifically manufactured by fishermen and others. Epigen or EPO is used to boost red blood cell count in order to stimulate the endurance during a race and to improve race recovery. It has street/track names such as Blood Builders, Monkey, or BB3. Issue with EPO is that these drugs increase blood production, and while the horse is exercising, this puts a massive amount of pressure on the horse's heart because there's extra blood now in his body. And this can lead easily to heart attacks and death. So when a horse dies of cardiac arrest suspiciously during a race, not saying it is because they were on drugs, but this is one of the ways it kills horses. Red acid is a custom drug that's used to reduce inflammation and pain in the joints. It's used to mask injuries. Red acid, along with just pain shots, massive amounts of painkillers, and like joint blocks, which most horse owners are familiar with. Their horses during a lameness exam may have their joints blocked from time to time so they can't feel, so they can figure out where that lameness is. All of these drugs are given to horses to mask existing injuries so that the horse can compete and look sound. The risk with these drugs is that the horses often overexert themselves and cause further damage that leads to them breaking their legs and having to be euthanized.
So just joy of a time. Really great stuff.
Right. None of this is about having a horse compete better and recover better. Like, these aren't drugs that are being given because you care about the animal and you want them to just do their best. These are drugs that you don't care what the risk is as long as the horse wins that race that day.
These are the drugs used to make sure the horse doesn't feel it when they break their legs.
Which I guess that's good to know. Guys, when you see a racehorse break their legs, they probably can't feel it.
No.
Right?
Oh my God, no. This is horrible. Oh, I want to go hug my ponies now.
So on January 26, 2019, a horse named Aztec Sense was entered in the $150,000 Fred W. Hoop Stakes at Gulfstream Park. So of Aztec Sense's last 14 races with Navarro as his trainer, he had won 12 of them. So it was clear coming into this race that he was a heavy favorite and was likely to win. If he won that day at that race, he would also bring home Navarro's 1,000th win. So it was no surprise that Aztec Sense won the race. However, as soon as the race was over, Aztec Sense was pulled off the backstretch, unsaddled, and vanned off to the barn. Navarro was quick to say that his horse had took a bad step, had injured his ankle likely, and that my vets are waiting for him. Oh my God, what a racehorse. The heart he has. The milestone came at a bad time, Navarro said. The horses always come first. This diminishes the win. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. Aztec Sense had injured himself at the end of this race or during the race. I can't find what happened to him, but likely he was euthanized that day after the race. He never raced again. There's no record of where Aztec Sense, what happened to him. So it wasn't part of the indictment that said anything specifically about Aztec Sense. We can definitely agree based off the following information that Aztec Sense was heavily doped in that race. So according to Navarro, the Navarro indictment, on January 25th, one of his co-conspirators, Oaks, ended up calling him and offering him a performance-enhancing drug that there was zero chance he would get caught, that the drug did not test. That drug was delivered to Navarro in time for that race on the 26th, which is what he wanted it for. He was later, February 18th, just a few weeks after Aztec Sense's tragic injury, Service, the other trainer I mentioned who had a barn near him at Monmouth, ended up texting Navarro a warning that there were track officials on site to do a surprise inspection of the barns prior to the race. Navarro later texted Service and thanked him. This is what his text said and thanking Service for the heads up. This is in reference to the track official walking into the barn. He would have caught our asses fucking pumping and fuming every fucking horse that runs today. A lot of the drugs are done either by injections, or they also do what's called drenching, where they'll tube the horse, some sort of tube up their nose into their stomach and fill their stomachs with whatever drug they're using that day. So I don't know if that's what he's referring to by pumping and fuming, but we can deduce that he had drugs in time for Aztec Sense's race, and he was in the habit of filling every horse that ran with drugs in that exact time period. So I would imagine Aztec Sense, who had $150,000 on the line.
That just makes me so sick to my stomach. And like, that poor fucking horse, those poor horse, all of them, not even just Aztec, but all of the ones involved in that barn. Like, it's so heartbreaking because Aztec was just one of those horses to get affected and to die by this guy's hand, to have been hurt in such a way that, like, this other guy, wasn't this the one that warned him? Wasn't that the one that, like, they were both running at the same track and then people stopped running because all their horses kept winning, so it wasn't worth it?
Yes. So remember XY Jet, one of his most successful horses?
No.
So XY Jet was one of Navarro's most successful horses. He actually traveled to Dubai with this horse and won tons of money with this horse. So his success due to the drugs Navarro was giving him. Actually, XY Jet's story is shared in the indictment specifically. So on March 30th, 2019, XY Jet won the Golden Shaheen race in Dubai, winning $1.5 million in that race alone. This was a month after he had won $30,000 at Gulfstream Park in Florida. Prior to both races, XY Jet was heavily dosed with illegal drugs. So starting February 9th, 4 days before his first place finish at Gulfstream, Navarro started requesting joint blockers, to be sent to him immediately for XY Jet. Those were sent, delivered, and administered for an exercise ride. Then the next day, on the 10th, he again reached out requesting additional blockers from both Oaks and Skeleton, who work with Seth Fishman as manufacturers, for blockers to be delivered. On February 11th, after 2 successful exercise runs on the blocker, Navarro made a plan with Oaks about how he would smuggle the blocker into the track for the race on the 13th. On the 13th, Navarro instructed Oaks to lie about who he was, to say he was XY Jet's owner, so he could get on site to administer the blocker. Before the race in Dubai, a similar scenario unfolded. On March 22nd, 8 days before the race, while in the UAE, Navarro personally injected XY Jet with Monkey, which is the blood builder. Navarro described how he had given XY Jet at least 50 injections leading up to the race, and was even giving it to him in the mouth after XY Jet's, after his for his win. So he was injecting him over and over and over, and when he couldn't inject him anymore, he would start shooting it in the horse's mouth.
Oh my God.
After XY Jet won, Navarro sent Fishman sent Navarro a text saying, like, congratulations, and Navarro replied back to Fishman saying, thank you, boss, you are a big part of it.
That horse must have been so injured to need, oh my gosh.
Yeah? And to give him that much, so many days in a row, like, you don't care. You don't care.
And just to be, like, pumping, that horse must have, I hope to God he never felt any of that. But to, like, keep running when his body was that hurt.
Like, I feel horrible giving my horse one injection. Like, I, like, so sorry, horse. How do you stand there and give your horse, like, 50 injections? And I get it probably didn't happen all in one day, but it happened over a several day period. So you're giving him, like, 5 to 10 injections every day? What the fuck? Most horses that died in Navarro's care didn't get news releases. The government knows that he euthanized in secret multiple horses because they have on tape his assistant trainer saying, you know how many effing horses Navarro effing killed and broke down that I made disappear? You know how much trouble we could get in if they found out that 6 horses were killed? On January 8th, 2020, Navarro publicly announced XY Jet had died during an exercise ride of an apparent heart attack. Navarro claimed he lost a friend that day.
That poor horse.
Between 2017 and 2019, Navarro paid Fishman tens of thousands of dollars to purchase PEDs for his horses.
What were they?
The performance-enhancing drugs. He spent tens of thousands of dollars from Fishman, and we know he was purchasing from other people at the same time. So remember that 2012 blog post I shared earlier?
Yeah.
Let me share a few more quotes.
The one where he was like, they just love running at the track?
Yeah. My stepdad taught me how to take care of a horse. He was a good leg man. What are your keys to it? Working hard, getting on your knees, taking care of them, looking for heat or signs of bruises. Heat in their legs is usually a sign that something is wrong, that there might be filling in their joints. You want their legs to feel nice and tight and cold. My employees and I believe in taking as much time as a horse needs to get ready for a race. I think a lot of younger generation trainers lean a lot on the vets and don't believe as much in working with an animal. It's the same thing as a boxer. You've got to work with them and take care of them. When you've got guys like I have, you don't have many problems. I have 4 grooms, 2 hot walkers, 2 exercise riders, plus a good blacksmith, and they make it real easy for me. My workers are my secret. There's no medicine that is going to make a horse run better. People ask me, what are you doing to win races? And I say, come on to the barn and see. I don't do anything special. We work and we spend money on shavings and hay and feed and supplements. We make sure they get their electrolytes in the morning. My guy over there, he is taking his time with the supplements, not just dumping them into their feed. When you do that, a lot of them back away from their feed and start losing weight. That is why we take our time and try to give them everything orally. Just so you know, that blog post was written March 9th, 2012, just a couple weeks after he had been told that he was caught giving horses drugs. So of course he's going to say there's no medicine that is going to make a horse run better. But the public didn't find out until 2013 that he was for sure giving horses drugs.
Why use medicine when you could just drug them out of their minds?
But like, that's just so he knew what he was saying in that article. Like, to say that we just monitor their legs and make sure their legs, like they spend time in the, he says he ices his horse's legs for like a few hours every day. All of that is good, but you know you're saying that because you're covering up your butt right now.
Yeah, he's just lying through his teeth trying to save his own hide. He doesn't care one bit for the horses that he's dumping and pumping into.
No, not at all. And that was 2012. That was 2012. We're now up here talking about 2019, that we for sure know what he's doing in 2019. Obviously, he got more brazen as time went on, and he started doing more and more.
Yeah, how was he able to go on for so long, doing this for so many years to so many horses? Think about the number of racehorses that we see recycled through the barns. That, like, obviously, there's some racehorse trainers that, like, don't recycle their horses through as frequently. They have their horses that they run regularly, year after year. This is not one of those guys. This guy is recycling horses through and dumping them after like a year of being with them that he trashes their body. How many horses was he taking in and just ruining?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at his race records and you could see that I think most horses ran maybe once or twice, maybe 3 times with him. I don't know. I think he acted as the trainer for a lot of horses because a lot of owners wanted to be part of his program. You know, they wanted what he was selling. And so I think whether it worked or didn't work, that would determine how many times the horse ran with them. There's a lot of stories I can share from the indictment. I'm not going to share all of them. I do have some more to share. But I mean, he was training horses in California without ever being in California. What he was actually doing was making phone calls and like giving them drugging protocols.
Do you know how many horses died as a result of him or like in his care? Is that mentioned at all?
So we know his assistant trainer on the phone mentions at least 6 horses. The problem is a lot of his horses are not XY Jet. We know about XY Jet because he was so successful that he had to make a public statement. But like, we can't even, like, the Aztec Sense, I couldn't confirm that Aztec Sense was dead. I'm like pretty sure Aztec Sense is dead though.
That was put down that day. Yeah.
And so how many other horses? We don't know. But again, we know at least 6. I don't think that includes XY Jet or Aztec Sense.
I'm betting it's in at least the double digits.
I would guess. And like, maybe they didn't and you don't know what the effect of those drugs is on them either long term. So maybe they didn't break a leg and have to be euthanized immediately. But like, a lot of these horses, if they're breaking legs because they're giving them drugs to exercise, so if they're doing that on the exercise track, that's not going to be publicized like the same way it would be if it happened in front of the public on a race day. So at the end of 2019, Navarro had finished 16th nationally. So he was the 16th ranked trainer. He finished that year with $6.8 million in winnings, and Service was doing a little bit better with 8th place and $11 million in earnings, and his horse Maximum Security had even won the Kentucky Derby. Unfortunately, he was disqualified for interfering with another horse. So let's talk about Maximum Security. He was not eliminated from or disqualified for drugs, but Maximum Security was definitely on drugs. So Maximum Security, along with several of Service's other horses, were being dosed with that SGF 1000 drug. Service even recommended that drug to Navarro because he said he was using it on like 12 of his, or Service was using it on all his horses, and Navarro informed him that he had like 12 of his horses on it. And that's the one that like helps with their endurance as well. By 2019, the dealers of SGF 1000 drug, which again is only manufactured for illegal use purposes in racehorses, was bragging in phone calls that they were selling ass loads of it. That's how much they were selling, ass loads of this drug. And they were saying that they cleverly hid it and labeled it as a dietary supplement for equines because that way it is not ever going to be questioned. FDI, like if the FDA approved it. So no one's ever going to question if the FDA approved it if we just say it's a supplement. Because remember our supplement episode, guys? Supplements are not regulated. However, lots of people were getting suspicious of these horses. So in New Jersey actually did test Maximum Security in June 2019 before a race. But due to the delays in like testing, so they'll test before a race, but it may be a few weeks before they have the results of that blood test or that urine sample, depending what they're doing. So the horse often can still enter and win a race, even though they won't be caught being on drugs till later. He knew that his horse had just received that drug SGF 1000 and then was tested and then went on and ended up winning second in that race. But the thing with SGF 1000 is if it's tested, it comes up as Dex, which Dex is an allergy medicine that a lot of horse owners give to their horses and is allowed as an allowed substance. So they were getting like fake prescriptions for Dex to be written so that if that drug did pop up, they could just say it was Dex. It's also reported that in 2019 that the pressure was really on Navarro and Service at this point because they were becoming so successful. Now well-pedigreed horses were coming into their circle. I found a 2019 article where Navarro was excited to show that he could train young horses because they were becoming like celebrity status for how good of trainers they were. There's an article where people were saying that like Navarro just longed for simpler times. He never intended to get this big. He just wanted a couple horses and it was just too much stress for them. And even Service was saying this, that it was just like, I want to hand this over to my assistant trainers. I don't want to be part of this anymore. It's just too much pressure. And then like a week later goes on to win the richest race in the world, which is in Saudi Arabia. And it was a $2 million or $20 million race.
Yeah, I never wanted any of this. Please pay me more. I'm going to keep doing this to my horses and winning. But no, I never wanted any of this. BS. What a couple of class acts.
Yes. So I've got just a couple more stories to share before I wrap up this story, because I do want to just point out how widespread this is, because again, 29 people were arrested. This was happening in barns all over the East Coast, and it's still happening in other barns.
And just think of that 29 people. Think of how many horses were beneath each person and how many people those 29 people were talking to and helping dealing that haven't been snatched up that also have horses beneath their care.
Right, because those people are, a big chunk of them are trainers that have assistant trainers that, they're vets that are selling the products. Like, so these aren't like one person, one horse. This is
behaviors being perpetuated throughout whole barns.
This is thousands. The indictment says between Navarro and Service, who like profited the most off of this, that they had horses start between the two of them like 3,000 starts. So this is 3,000 horses that are like we know of for sure that are like starting races drugged. So the other trainer, Nicholas Surek, who is part of these indictments, but he's like much smaller scale compared to Navarro and Service. He had a horse named Northern Virgin. Oddly enough, I can't find Nicholas Surek or Northern Virgin anywhere on any of the like registry pedigree websites. So I don't know if they have like different name. Like, I don't know if they're training under different names, why I can't find this horse. I'm going to trust the FBI because this comes straight from their indictment, but it's weird that I can't find them online anywhere. Surek went to extreme efforts to hide his doping, like how much he was doping this horse. So on December 17th, 2018, Surek gave his horse the Epigen, which without a valid prescription. Later that very day, New Jersey Racetrack Commission members came to his barn in order to conduct like an unannounced drug test of his horses. So knowing he had just given Northern Virgin this drug, he hid the horse and told officials that the horse wasn't there. The officials came back the next day to do the drug test. Again, he said that the horse wasn't there. In fact, the horse had never lived at this barn. I don't know why you think I own this horse. And he made arrangements that day, December 18th, to have the horse shipped to Ohio. So the horse got transported out of his barn and was hanging out at another barn waiting to be shipped to Ohio. The FBI tracked this horse down and came into like a sneak blood sample. Like they ended up taking a sample of Northern Virgin's blood without anyone knowing. And I just want to imagine the FBI in like ninja suits dropping down from like the hayloft and like taking a blood sample from this horse. So this horse ended up getting shipped to Ohio and was in Ohio until the end of February. The entire time that horse was in Ohio, Surik was instructing them to give him blood builders and other performance-enhancing drugs before he came back to race in February. So even though he had to just hide this horse from officials and almost got caught, I mean, he did get caught. The FBI found the horse and took a blood sample that proved the horse was on drugs. He still had the horse being pumped full of drugs before he came back.
Jeez.
So the last story before I wrap it up gave me chills to hear this story.
No,
okay, like
they've already been so bad.
it's not, it's no animal cruelty, but I just have to share this story. So the last story comes from the Izaki indictment. So this is Sarah Izaki and her daughter Ashley. They were a team that purchased illegal drugs from Mexico and then smuggled them into the United States, which is like a big no-no, whether you're giving them to horses or like people. You can't smuggle drugs across Mexico. So they have actually some of the most biggest charges against them, where most people's charges are for like each charge they have is for like up to a 5-year maximum sentence. Smuggling things across the Mexican border is a 20-year sentence. So they could actually go to jail for like the longest period of time. But they were dealers. So they went up and down the East Coast selling their drugs, and they sold something called a masking agent. So masking agent is a substance that is designed to conceal the presence of an illicit drug from any tests. So Izaka ended up selling several batches of illegal performance-enhancing drugs to undercover buyers. And during one such exchange in October 2019, she told the buyer about a drug called the Devil. The Devil was a masking agent that could disguise the presence of another drug in human or animal bodies. She described it as something very new. You put in the horse and you can use coke. Like you can give your horse coke, then give them this drug and the masking drug, and it will come back negative. Like nobody can find this drug in this horse's system. In October that same year, she met with another undercover buyer and she described something called devil's breath. And this is her quote: "You can kill somebody with poison and you can clean the blood as long as he is still alive."
Oh my God.
Yeah. Isn't
that's horrible.
The fact that she's talking about people, like, I get it with horses, but the fact that you're like, this drug can also be used to clean the blood of people so that you can poison people, you could kill somebody, and as long as you give them the masking agent at the same time, no one can ever prove it. Ma'am, like, who are you? What are you doing? Like, what?
Who have you killed and gotten away with it?
Right? Like, what?
Where do these vile people come from? Oh my God.
So it's really unclear from the indictments just how connected all of these people were, especially at the height of their crime. We obviously know like how Navarro and Service met as being trainers at the same barn. We know that a lot of these people were manufacturers that were selling to multiple people. We know Robertson had a website, but it is something that's kind of unknown still and probably will come out later. Like I said, in 2018, the FBI began an investigation that included wiretaps, undercover buyers, people acting as owners and trainers buying these drugs. So they have a lot of these drugs. They ended up around 4 a.m. Monday morning, March 9th, 2020, conducting a raid across several jurisdictions from Florida to New York, where they arrested 27 people. This included Robertson. This included Navarro. They showed up at their barns, Palm Meadows Thoroughbred Training Center in Boynton Beach, Florida, and Gulfstream Track. They raided Navarro and Service's barns. All of these people were arrested at the same time. This was like a huge deal to have FBI agents coordinated across multiple jurisdictions to arrest these people. So within hours of these arrests, the federal prosecutors and the FBI announced charges against 27 people, with 2 more names added later. The indictments revealed elaborate conspiracy allegations in which chemists operating out of a clandestine lab supplied veterinarians and trainers with PEDs bearing names such as snake venom, which ended the pain in horses, and bronch, which helps horses breathe easier while exercising, and monkey to aid in endurance. So why did this investigation take so long? Not only is it staffed with former federal agents, but the private company in recent years was awarded like millions of dollars by the Department of Justice and other U.S. agencies to like develop federal like databases. So these connections are super helpful, but they had like doping in a sport, particularly in a sport in which illicit drugs are not a controlled substance. Like it's really hard to prove this. It's really hard to get enough information that you can actually take it to court and do something with it. So yes, this investigation started back in 2015 and it took 5 years before they were able to arrest anybody. But like, how do you prove? You have to have so much proof that this was actually happening because these aren't illegal drugs. It's not illegal to give these drugs to horses. We aren't talking about humans. We're talking about animals. And so like this is a very low priority on anyone's list to prosecute these people. So they had to have like an extremely strong case before they could take it to court. So kind of some closing thoughts and updates as to where things are right now. So I think like how many horses Navarro and Service, because like I have no idea if with Service are responsible for killing, like we're probably never gonna know. His trial was originally scheduled for winter 2021, and I hope like the judge who he's working with like has no mercy for him. Actually, interestingly enough, the judge is a fellow horsewoman herself, and she owns like a couple racehorses. They actually tried to get her dismissed from the case, Navarro, because they said like she couldn't be impartial because she owns horses, and so she couldn't be like nice to this guy. And honestly, I don't give a shit. Like if she can't be nice to him,
I don't care.
Like really not that big of a problem.
If she's gonna levy like heavier sentences and heavier fines against them, I'm all in support.
Yeah, and so she's not dismissed. She's still part of this case. Like she thought that was ridiculous. I just don't understand how you can be so abusive to animals. Like I said, XY Jet is one of the only horses we know about because he was already so famous. Like his disappearance would have been noticed, so he had to make a public statement. Scott Robertson from earlier, he said that one of the hardest parts of his punishment is that it's a lifelong ban on training or raising horses. He grew up in a family of horsemen in Ohio and expressed, how sad he was about his role. He claimed that his role was small and his intent was never to harm. I love the sport, Robinson said. I never meant to put a black eye on it. And he's just like so sad he can't be around horses now. That's like the hardest part. Yeah.
Oh, you fool. I am so happy he's not around horses.
He was the guy with the websites that was selling. When people had complaints with their products, they would call Robinson. One man, they have like the phone conversation, or maybe it was an email conversation, where the guy was like, I gave this drug to my horse 3 different times. My horse was like out of it, like knocked out of it for 3 days. I think you gave me a bad drug. And Robinson's only response was like, here, I'll give you some more. Like, he didn't care. The guy was like, is this, like, what's happening to my horse? Is this okay? Like, obviously the guy was a bad person to be giving his horse illegal drugs. And Robinson was like, I don't care. Just here's more drugs. So, like, to say that you played a small part and it wasn't your intent to hurt anyone, BS. Because you did and you knew what you were doing.
You did it again and again and again.
Yeah. So in the last couple weeks, like I said, a lot of these people are filing motions to change their plea, including Navarro, who originally pleaded not guilty. He's now changed his plea to guilty. So he has a trial that's now scheduled for August 11th, so just next week, where I don't know where he's going to be able to change his plea. So I don't think there's going to be any sentencing at that trial. It's just his trial to change his plea. I know Service is going to do the same thing, and Service's lawyer actually has requested that the wiretaps that were used for a lot of this be suppressed and not released to the public. And not used either. Fishman was originally arrested in 2019. So he was arrested kind of ahead of everyone else because he was sort of the linchpin in this case. There was a lot of, as he was the one that was selling a lot of the products. He was originally arrested earlier, and they had like raided his warehouse.
And Fishman was a vet, right?
Yes, he was the vet that was manufacturing all of these products. He was the guy who did not have the memory erasing pill. But now knowing about the masking agent, maybe Fishman can make us a memory erasing pill. Like if we can
just masks it.
Clean blood, we probably can do memory erasing. So while he was released on bail, he continued with this activity of manufacturing and selling illegal drugs. So his charges have been increased. So his maximum sentence has increased from 5 years to 10 years because he continued well on bail to conduct illegal activities. So one thing that I thought was really interesting when you look at the 29 people who were arrested, that there is a big chunk of persons who were not arrested and not part of this scandal, yet gained the most. Not a single owner was arrested or charged, yet they profited the most off of this doping scandal. And we have evidence that owners were well aware of what was happening to their horses. We have phone calls documenting that. Yet not a single horse owner was arrested.
Yikes. And they're just going to go out and buy more horses.
And find someone else to give them drugs because they know it works. The last little part is a legislation update. So as was mentioned throughout this episode is that there are no national laws or anything that the U.S. government or a police agency can go after these like trainers and vets for. However, at the same time, the Jockey Club contacted Five Stone. They created a political PAC that started making large contributions to political candidates. They donated about $64,000 to elect federal candidates as state senators and representatives. Most of them Republicans, just based off of where they live and who represents them. The Jockey Club ended up sending about $20,000 to McConnell, as well as a committee in his name, and then $5,000 to other funds that were trying to help elect Republicans. So this was because at that time they were trying to get legislation passed that would bring horse racing underneath that United States anti-doping agency. So that initial legislation failed, but they have donated about spent $830,000 on lobbying since 2018 in order to try to get legislation passed where horse racing is regulated. That initial effort failed, but they tried again in 2020, right around the same time that September 2020, right around the same time that the rescheduled Kentucky Derby was occurring, and about the same time as those indictments were being re-updated and released. Mitch McConnell announced at that time in September 2020 that he had actually his own legislation, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act of 2020. So the idea with this act that was actually passed was that instead of having it horse racing regulated by a U.S. agency, they decided to create a 9-person board that would oversee and create rules for the horse industry, and that they would then contract with the U.S. anti-doping agency to be the enforcement for them. I think this is a little bit like letting the foxes guard the hen house, because if you have members from the community that they're trying to regulate, making the what? But part of it was they couldn't get Churchill Downs on board. So Churchill Downs was the reason that this legislation did not pass earlier, because Churchill Downs was afraid that this would cut into their profits. If you couldn't dope horses, that this would somehow cut into their profits.
Ugh, people suck.
But this bill actually was passed as part of that $900 billion corona relief virus bill. So you got those stimulus checks, and horse racing is now regulated by a 9-person anti-doping board, and then the U.S. acts as an enforcement agency. And that is the juice man and in that story. There you go, folks.
That's the horrors of racing. That's the horrors that we all like. Those that say they don't like racing, this is the horrors that it is that we don't like.
This is why. Any questions? Any final thoughts?
No, my only final thoughts are these poor horses. My heart goes out to every single one of them, and it just makes me feel physically ill imagining just the cruelty that takes place, that people are willing to go through and just bestow upon animals, just the sheer idiocy and just drugging these young horses out of their minds.
All for money. That's all it was they just wanted money. It had nothing to do with...
It's just so sad.
It's a $1 billion industry, a $1 billion U.S. industry that they just wanted their chunk of. They were instructed to go after big fish. I mean, we know Bob Baffert is well known for doping his horses, was not part of this. He is his own entity, but obviously the trainers, even the small fish, are getting drugs from someone. There's still so many people out there that are doing this.
I think it's so much more rampant than the 29 people that were arrested. And I think we all are aware of that and know that. And while there are good people out there, there's so many bad people that just overrun those that are trying to do good.
So I do want to mention Santa Anita, California, that track real quick, because obviously they've been in the news a lot where they had a lot of horse deaths between like 2018 and 2019. That incident, those reports were coming out at the same time the FBI was really stepping in to take over this investigation. It is pretty much just assumed and accepted that the horses that are dying at Santa Anita are dying due to the drugs in their system, that they are part of this story, just like XYZ and Aztec Sense, that these horses are under similar circumstances. However, they just haven't had the same resources invested in investigating what's going on at Santa Anita. And so a lot of the information is coming back that like everyone's like, there's nothing, you know, bad happening. Everyone's above board. The trainers are off, like nothing bad is happening. They're not drugging their horses. But I don't think that's true at all, especially when we know that a lot of the FBI was sending a lot of the blood and urine to Hong Kong to be tested because the US labs just couldn't test for a lot of the drugs. The drugs have been changing. These are custom-made drugs that are being designed to not be detected. If they are being detected, they're popping up as things like Dex, which is an antihistamine that horses can totally be on. And then we know about this masking agent now. We know that like these drugs were making their way to California. We know that Navarro raced at Santa Anita. So to say that like Santa Anita is not part of this, while they're not part of this investigation, they are totally part of the story. And this is the same thing. So to blame it on the footing is ridiculous. It's not the footing, obviously.
On that upbeat note, thank you guys so much for listening all the way through. I know this was a long one, but I think it was necessary and needed to get as much information as possible and just share these horses' stories that are having to suffer through these horrible circumstances and are at the hands of these people that are doing shady dealings that are scummy.
And I think you have to remember, like, there is a lot of people that don't like horse racing. And this is the reason why. So I know there's a lot of, like, this is a very controversial topic. Is horse racing good or bad? But, like, if this is what's happening in this sport at such a, like, huge degree, you have to recognize that those who don't like horse racing have a very good reason for not liking it.
Yeah, it's the environment of which it breeds and the type of behaviors that it promotes. And on that note, stay safe, stay classy, stay in the saddle, and don't drug your freaking horses.
You know, stay away from drugs. Drugs are bad, kids. Just say no. Just say no.
Say no to drugs and stay in school.